share anything at the end if you want.
I'm definitely in for the chit chat.
Yes. Okay, well, that makes it 3:15 or
Yep.
8:15 for me, so I guess I'll give it away to Deaf Mama. She's going to present here, so thanks for putting the time together, making this. So, yeah, there you go. That's the floor.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for coming in today, especially on such short notice. I really appreciate everyone being here. So I'm going to be talking about relationships and porn. I'm kind of going to be winging it here, but I'm really going to be integrating the slides because they're important. But also, if you have any questions, just go for it. I've got the messages up, but I recommend you at me so I don't accidentally miss anything, but I'll try regardless. So, first off, the shit sucks. Everyone agrees. You don't want to be in this position. Nobody volunteers to have an addiction, and especially one that can impact relationships so severely. But, what can be done from here? I'm going to go over about, my background and my own personal experiences, relationships, what to expect before, during, and after a relationship. And then I'm just going to throw in some statistics because what is a good, informative presentation about porn, if it doesn't have stats? So, about me, to give some clarity, I've been fapping from a very young age. My best estimate is at 10 years old. I've never had a relationship where I wasn't, and like most people, I had the impression that it was normal and healthy. I didn't get into porn until my very early college years. I went full force, to be honest, and I noticed a huge spike in my frequency of use. However, the decision to quit didn't come until about a year and a half later, when I found myself only able to get off to hardcore content, and I had a primary interest in actual rape. I would find myself distracted from school, didn't care too much about my relationships, and I just waited until I got home. The relationship I was in at the time was the only person who knew I looked at porn at all, except even then I was downplaying the frequency. The point I'm trying to make here is that in my situation, it was so fast and alarming and apparent that I don't know how soon or if I ever would have quit had that not been the case. And I guess it's because of that I feel a little fortunate, because my addiction escalated so quickly that I knew I had to stop. But that was hard. It was even harder trying to enjoy intimacy with my boyfriend unless I was thinking about these things that I had been watching, and I was unable to comprehend how I ever enjoyed sex before. Trying to get back into that headspace was, to me, permanently impossible. So how it impacted my relationships. This would mark the remainder of my sex life for years. I essentially had female ED, and unless I fantasized about my porn, I wasn't able to do the thing. I kept a straight face, essentially lying to every person I'd been with, because for the majority of the time, they weren't in my thoughts. There were only a few people who ever knew about this, but even then I kind of toned it down, and virtually all my relationships, I kept that part of myself a complete secret. There would be relationships where I tried to think about them, but most of the time it took too much effort and so much more time that I didn't bother. At some point in my mid-20s, I decided to quit MO, kind of recognizing the pattern. I was single at the time and found myself wasting hours fapping again, and it was hard and I sucked at it for months, but I basically found a formula that worked for me and managed an 8-month streak. But unfortunately, I wouldn't get to experience no fap while in a relationship until about 47 days ago. For the first time in a decade, I've been able to enjoy my partner without fantasizing about something else. Even more amazing, I think, is that this is the longest I'd gone while in a relationship without MO. I never thought that it would make such a difference until I got here. Um, Although it's been years since I've looked at porn, I've been going through intense flat lines. There are times where I have to stop because I'm unable to climax with my boyfriend. And I didn't think, as a girl who hadn't looked at physical porn in so long, that I would be dealing with real physical dysfunctions. All I can say is I guess that's why they call it no-fap, because, quitting porn is great, but for me, there was real damage that I incurred from years of fapping, and the problems do go further than physical intimacy. I've met many guys who've reported seeing women as sex objects from porn use, and low-key, I feel like it's no different for women. Maybe not for all women, but my feelings were strongly that they were selfish and unfeeling. It's been hard to admit, and I've largely kept that perspective to myself, partly from shame and partly because I wanted to believe otherwise. But I did. I learned to hate guys on a very intrinsic level that I denied was even happening. Thinking of them as shallow and cheap and incapable of genuinely loving someone, and I thought whatever affection I accrued was only because of the benefit I afforded them and not because I was in any effect actually loved. I'll be honest, I'm at day 47 right now, so I can only speak from the context of someone with that stage and background. Not everyone is going to have pied at the same time. It takes, the time it takes to recover varies from person to person. Flat lines and how they play out is also unique. Just don't get caught up with expectations. You're literally recovering from years and years of regular use. You're not going to be all better just because you've been, PMO free for a few months. I have to remind myself of that, and you should too if you find yourself in that slump. So relationships, before, during, and after, but before I get into that, I just want to talk about one aspect that I think is the most pivotal cornerstone in regards to relationships and porn use, and that is shame and guilt. As much as we try to convince ourselves the normative nature of porn, a part of us questions the concepts entirely. Something feels off, and it becomes particularly apparent in a relationship. Shame and guilt may, at the surface, feel like simply intangible emotions, but there's validity to them, and they come with a clear source. There's an interesting article in Scientific American that goes into detail titled "The Scientific Underpinnings and Impacts of Shame." But for the sake of this presentation, I just want to go, over certain parts that really resonate with our cause. We feel shame when we violate the social norms we believe in. At such moments, we feel humiliated, exposed, and small, and are unable to look another person straight in the eye. We want to sink into the ground and disappear. Shame makes us direct our focus inward and view our entire self in a negative light. Feelings of guilt, in contrast, result from a concrete action for which we accept responsibility. Guilt causes us to focus our attention on the feelings of others. We will be forced to experience this shame and guilt for as long as we relapse, guaranteed. There are things we can do to soften the blow, but this aspect, I think, will always be inevitable. I felt shame for masturbating in spite of convincing myself constantly that it wasn't wrong, nobody cares, and everyone's doing it. I felt shame like I knew better, but I just didn't want to believe it, clinging to whatever evidence would agree with that sentiment. That article goes on to say the difference is that when we feel shame, we view ourselves in a negative light. We feel guilty because our actions affected someone else and we feel responsible. Guilt, that feeling of pain we experience knowing we're hurting another person, is still present for me today, but tempered because I have full transparency with my partner. They know all of this and then some. I feel guilt because of the accumulation of this addiction had made me, less present as an intimate partner, knowing deep down that I had spent years thinking about something else while being with him. I mean, it hurts. However, the pain doesn't compare to how I was when I was actively hiding my addiction. And in the process of recovering, I've found so many layers of myself healing that I guess in a way I didn't know existed. But if you're single, and some of those factors might not apply to you. In fact, there's a lot of things you won't exactly get to experience shift, such as feelings of excitement or interest in your mate or ability to focus on them. But at the same time, you won't have the same kind of pain experienced by those who are currently recovering while in a relationship. Um, Obviously, in all cases, the motto is to recover. There's no situation where recovery isn't to your benefit. However, if you find yourself talking to someone, there's some things to consider. Just because you're talking to someone doesn't mean that no fap gets easier. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. One might think that a new relationship could help with recovery, but that's not the case. Your brain is hyped up about this new person. You're either likely to face more frequent and more intense urges because there's a new love interest in your life, or on the flip side, you might be taken aback so much that you don't think about no fap at all and find avoiding PMO easy, only to experience later on that your guard is back down and the high has subsided and your urges come creeping back in. There's no telling where you will be. I've found that every relationship, or at least the start of one, is different. But when it comes to being straightforward with a companion about your addiction, there is really not a better opportunity than the beginning. The longer that you wait, the more hurt you could cause or lowered positive impression if you're on a high streak. But another pitfall to a new relationship is that you're also so invested in trying to make a good impression that it makes it hard to be transparent. To be honest, that doesn't get any easier. It only gets more difficult. It's comparable to a task that you really don't want to deal with and putting it off until it's an even bigger deal to handle. I will say now that I have finally been completely honest, it is really hard to top being loved completely by someone, which I guess brings me to my next point, which is being in a relationship. Relationships. When you're in a relationship, there's some highs and lows you'll experience with a companion that you'll never encounter anywhere else. And in such a delicate situation, I'm hoping to give you the best advice I physically can. Let me go ahead and define what I mean by relationship in this context. I'm talking about a serious, romantically involved relationship. That's it. Those can take on many forms based on culture or your own opinions. And in the next slide, I took the opportunity to quote part of a book, The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, which has an inspirational section on love. I hope no one will mind, as I think it relates well. When love beckons to you, follow him, though his ways are hard and steep. And when his wings enfold to you, yield to him, though the swords hidden among his pinions may wound you. And when he speaks to you, believe in him, though his voice may shatter your dreams as the north wind lays waste to the garden. For even as love crowns you, so shall he crucify you. Even as he is for your growth, so is he for your pruning. You will find, regardless of the outcome in your addiction recovery or your relationship, that you will go through the highs and lows relative to the process of recovery as it pertains to your boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever. So I know for some this might be, way out of the way question, but I do want to put this out there and hope you'll at least give it a listen. There's no situation where I wouldn't recommend telling them, only that there are cases which are less advisable than others. By being honest, you're actually doing more good for yourself than any possible negative outcome, though it might not seem that way on the surface. There's a new openness you feel. I felt having the opportunity to share that side of me, just a crack in the door, I think is better than nothing. The gains are well worth it in spite of the risks. And should you have a partner that supports you, I can only say I'm glad to share that journey with someone. But when is it more or less advisable? It depends on a few factors, namely the maturity and openness to the subject. That can vary based on their age, religious affiliations, their personal experiences with porn or thoughts about sex. If they're young, they might have a more knee-jerk reaction than someone who's been around the block. Speaking from experience, according to some statistic I read, about 50% of women are against porn, which really to me means that you have more than a 50% chance of who'd support what you're trying to accomplish here and wouldn't think less of you either way. There are situations where I strongly encourage it. For example, if you're thinking about marriage, in fact, if you are considering proposing, I recommend to be a bro to your wife and at least A, quit for good, or B, tell them what you're going through. But I really would opt for both if you can, since, you know, the rest of your life is a long damn time. You might as well open the book. Another case I'd particularly suggest it is if you're struggling with ED or lack of interest in sex. If your addiction has affected your sex life with your current partner, it would be a healthy decision to inform them. You have to face the weight each time there is an interaction or an occurrence. It is, in my experience, better to have it out in the open than to continually shrug it off. The issue doesn't heal as quickly as you'd like to expect it to, and you're better off involving them. For what it's worth, the places in their heads might be going in order to conjure up an explanation is not something you'd want for them. It's better that they know where you're really coming from. And if you're serious about them, I also very much recommend involving them in that side of your life. It's a high statistic that you will eventually get caught if you continue use. I think I have that number in a later slide. If you're serious about someone, it's not worth having your integrity tossed in the process, particularly if they've confronted you or asked you about porn. And even a delayed opportunity to be honest is still honesty, and it's definitely more honest than simply getting caught. So if you're going to communicate, I recommend by starting up the conversation yourself and saying where you're coming from. You get the opportunity to be at your comfort level of truthfulness. You can direct where the discussion goes, not having to give up details that you don't want to, and meanwhile having the benefit of putting yourself out there is immediate, even if all you're probably feeling is panic. And your mate gets to know where you're actually at inside. You get to be accepted for you, not just for how you want to be perceived. It adds another layer of significance to quitting, at least for me. Just telling someone I don't or won't is minuscule compared to saying I'm trying to quit an addiction. They're now a much more meaningful part of that paradigm for having been involved. And having that out there genuinely helps prevent relapsing regardless if you have plans to tell them about it in the future. What communication will look like from there depends on you. We live in a world where talking about sex is more bizarre than the act itself, and that has to change. But whatever path you decide to take, just be mindful that it provides an opportunity for you to grow together, not apart, it's hard. But if you maintain it, there's a lot of benefit to be had. On the question of does porn cause jealousy, someone just gave me that question to include in this, and in short, the answer is yes. Your mate is going to feel like they're actually competing for your attention. And I think what's important is to point out early on in the conversation that you came into the relationship like this. You already had an addiction. I actually suggest using the word addiction because it helps them recognize the lack of intent on your part to be in the situation. This isn't a competition. They're not struggling to keep up with porn while you're just a judge watching them fail miserably. You need healing, and it's a personal journey. And that's where you're coming from. But company is definitely welcome, though it isn't about them. This is something you've been going through and are actively trying to recover from. And I think if you do decide to communicate that, I would go at it with that angle. So after a breakup, coming apart is the most common way relationships go. No one is more vulnerable to a relapse than someone who's gone through a breakup. There are many situations that can take us down a notch, but I know that breakups, even if it's our decision, it does bring that high stress, red relapse state of mind. Emotionally, we're distracted, daily stresses seem bigger, and the ways we've been spending our time might change. We might have been spending all of our time talking to our partner. There's a sense of emptiness, and relapsing might seem like a good course of action, even logically. However, it only degrades our sense of self-worth. And just like anyone who's just broken a high streak, it becomes increasingly difficult to quit. If relapsing becomes a thought, I recommend to get reconnected with the resources that essentially kept you sober in the past. So this is my favorite part. What it is like to heal, the highlight of recovery. There's a lot of things that make NoFap an amazing lifestyle. While by yourself, you might experience an increase in productivity, mental clarity, and focus by no longer being a coomer. You might feel, more confident and complete within yourself, able to achieve objectives. I think this process does feed into itself in that you feel better for not, fapping all the time. So you continue to act on things that build you up, which help you not fap all the time. But in a relationship, there's another dynamic in the brain that changes. One useful question I was asked when looking for thoughts in this presentation was what barriers are caused by porn that the user might not be aware of. There are the obvious ones, such as the lack of interest, at least sexually, or being distracted. But the one thing you're not going to be aware of is the magnitude of indifference in you. There's a lack of presence I was never conscious of until a few weeks ago. All these years, I thought of myself as a good girlfriend. I tried hard enough, but it was all exterior. It's nearly impossible to fathom until you go through it directly. But I was never really there. Not with my whole heart, at least most of the time, but I am in subtle ways a different person. And how I take in their thoughts and behaviors has shifted in a way I couldn't have appreciated. While going through this, I already mentioned the awful parts such as flatlining and the difficulty to reach orgasm, but for the first time in a decade, I don't think about anyone or anything else except them. I'm finally able to climax to the person that loves me, where 2 months ago it wasn't possible. When I say he's my best friend, it hits different. I feel it on a different level than at that one point. I felt closed off. I had been numbed by fapping the majority of my life, and I never would have known the difference until I stopped. I had changed. My brain chemistry changed, and I know I'm still changing. I feel fortunate to be in NoFap because I'm being given the chance to make a new neural connection with someone, and I feel it on such an imperceptible level. I actually feel that much more connected to them than I did before when I started this journey. I didn't even think it would be possible. I thought the closeness I had then was the closest I'd get. But now I can look over and get excited to see his face. This treasure I have, I'm experiencing because I've quit. Not because my guy is fantastic, which he absolutely is, but the change happened within me. It's about being fully present and able to experience things, the real things that are right there in front of you. So here's the fun statistics. In a study on the effects of cybersex, researchers found that more than half of those engaged in cybersex had lost interest in sexual intercourse, while 1/3 of their partners had lost interest as well. While 1/5 of the couples, both partners, had a significantly decreased interest in sexual intercourse. Stated differently, this study showed that only 1/3 of couples maintained an interest in sexual relations with one another when one partner was engaged in cybersex. So, 70% of wives who've discovered porn, their husbands 70% of wives who've discovered their husband's porn addiction displayed signs of PTSD. Another reason to be transparent. 75% of the time a spouse's porn viewing will be discovered by accident, but 100% of relationships that are masters of nofap do not have fapping problems. And 68% of couples report a decrease in their sex life when one spouse is using porn. In a 2013 study of 68 UK sex therapists by the Cosmopolitan magazine, they found that 86% of people felt that porn had hurt their relationships, and 90% had seen an increase in relationship troubles due to porn use. There was a study that showed that prolonged exposure to pornography also fosters dissatisfaction with and even a distaste for a spouse's affection, and I feel like I relate to that one. This one was interesting. Couples who consume pornography are nearly twice as likely to divorce than couples who do not, at 11-to-6 ratio. So that's my presentation. You guys are awesome. Thank you for letting me get to host today's support group. I'm going to be annoying. If you guys like this presentation and found it helpful, you should consider being a member for the RecoveryHub Patreon. We have custom emojis, gifts, stickers, and priority voting. And I wanted to throw in a little quote. Though no one can go back and make a brand new start, anyone can start from now and make a brand new beginning. Thanks.